All right, we live with the imagination guru himself, Minister Jew. What's going on, man? Tell us about DAPA. That's taking place April the 9th, which is a workshop here in Chicago, man. What is DAPA?
DAP is a brainchild of mine. I created, last year actually, from my studying the imagination. And what I come to find out is that this whole thing that we call reality is really just a motion picture that involves those four things. DAPA is an acronym for director, author, producer, and actor. And so in this motion picture that we're all living in, we're all participating and adding our scripts to this thing called life. The more that we understand how to take control of the narrative rather, that we're creating, then we'll be able to see our desires and our goals manifest. So in this workshop coming up this weekend, we're going to touch on some of the principles that concerns quantum physics, quantum consciousness, and how the imagination is actually the doorway to step into that kingdom of light to create the movie that you're looking to produce.
Okay, share a testimonial with us from one of the or a few of the DAPA members.
Um, it's wide ranging, to be honest. People sometimes ask me, in a lot of cases you'll see us post different testimonials on the Facebook page and whatnot, and they're loaded with financial testimonials. And so people say sometimes, well, what else outside of finances? So I give you guys a couple ones that are not necessarily financially based. About 2 months ago, I had a webinar. I have a monthly webinar for my members. And a gentleman named Sonny, who's a member, his mother had a hole in her foot. She was suffering some type of condition. Her foot was, going through some changes. And she was 1,300 miles away from Sonny. But he loves his mother like most men do love their mom. And so when she told him what was going on with her foot, he felt bad at first, and he thought about one of the techniques that I give out called the positron pads. And he applied it. And for 3 days, he did the technique, he said, for 3 days. And he said on the third day, he called his mother. And lo and behold, she was up walking around at the grocery store. And she told him that the hole in the foot had closed remarkably well, and that all of a sudden she was just feeling better, and she couldn't really explain it. But yet, 3 days prior, she was going through a condition that had her basically bedridden. She couldn't really walk around and whatnot. So, when you step into this quantum thing, you really start to understand that all things are possible. There's really no limitations. We're creating our own limitations in our mind by, quote unquote, what reality or facts are. Sometimes those can be hindrances to us and our ability to create. And so that's one testimonial. Another testimonial dealing with love and relationships is the sister Khadijah. She's also a member. And she shared with us a testimonial a couple months back how she went to go visit her daughter, and her daughter had a little situation, caused her to leave her daughter's place, and she ended up catching a flat. And when she caught the flat, she pulls over, and a guy approaches her, and they're talking, and he's helping her out with the flat, and 2-3 months later, now they're in this blissful, lovely relationship. She's happy. She sends her testimonials. We talked last month on the monthly webinars how it's just going great. And so she utilized those techniques as well, because a lot of us have pain in our memories about relationships, things that have went awry in our past with people who we thought were dear to our hearts, and we end up breaking up in some very violent ways in a lot of cases. Disappointment filters the mind, and so we have to clean that up. And so I teach my members inside of the membership how to deal with those things. The most latest testimonial was 2 days ago. A young lady named Nikki Builder. She's also a member. What I do is I have my members send over their picture, and we can explain that a little later why that's important. Their picture along with their objective on what it is that they want to manifest in this reality, what it is that they want to see take place in their immediate environment. And so Nikki's objective was to manifest $10,000. That's just what she wanted to do. And so I put her on my vision board, like I put all of my members on my vision board. And we get an email about 2 days ago, and Nikki's like, Minister Jew, no Anpu, I just want to thank you guys for these techniques that you've shown us and shown me. And my testimonial is just the other day I received a $10K in cash from an unexpected source. A family member just came and dropped $10K off on her, and she was ecstatic about how it unfolded. And so, you know, these are just some of the testimonials from the people in the membership, some of the things that happen. Not to mention the calls that I get daily from people who listen to our message on the Underground Railroad, Brother Rich's platform. Just people calling saying, hey, you know, just listening to you guys on the radio uplifts my spirit, and all of a sudden I found $20, or all of a sudden I came across $300, or all of a sudden I got a $5,000 check. And you know, these are literal numbers that I'm saying. One young lady came across 5,000. You know, her name was Amber. And so, you know, these are just some of the things that take place when we fine tune our consciousness to another level of ideals, shall we say.
Indeed, indeed. Talk to us about the term consciousness. You hear it so much. What is consciousness to Minister Jew?
Man, this is a great question. Consciousness to me is awareness. It is your ability to take in data and formulate it in a way where you can utilize it. It is ever pervading. It's in all things, you know. Consciousness exists in rocks and humans and anything that has a vibratory frequency. There has to be some sort of consciousness there that's allowing it to emanate as being, whether animate or inanimate. And so it's like, how can I explain this, man? The tools that consciousness uses is light. It's actually light. And the best example that I always like to give is you have these ingredients to make a cake. You know, your favorite cake, strawberry, chocolate, vanilla, whatever. You have ingredients that go along with that cake. You have butter and sugar and eggs, etc., whatever you use to make your cake. And when these things all come together, the end result, after it's baked, you come out and you have this beautiful cake. Well, that's how light is to human beings. Light is what's facilitating our consciousness to be able to assimilate these things together in order to formulate pictures, in order to formulate emotions, in order to formulate our mentality. And so when we understand how to utilize light, i.e. consciousness, then we can create whatever it is that we want, because we know that it's in everything, it is of everything. And so then we just start to shape and mold our realities based upon the usage of that light or that consciousness.
Okay. Now talk to us about how does, you know, what does that have to do with the upliftment of the people, brother? When you deal with racism, you deal with police brutality, you deal with these various issues of the system. How can the imagination, or how can light, how does this help?
It's a great question. We just had a presentation a couple weeks back where we talked about this dynamic in detail. You know, over the past 3 or 4 years, we've been pioneers, I would say, in the area of justice in regards to spirituality and spiritual ideals. The imagination is the source for all things that exist. That's difficult to accept for a society that is entrenched in logic. You know, everything in this hemisphere has to go through a scientific method to be proven in order for people to substantiate it as real. But, and I'm giving these examples so that people can kind of get an idea where I'm going with to answer the question. Without the imagination, which is the doorway to the quantum, we wouldn't be able to talk on this microphone, Noble, or that camera that you're using. Everything that man's ever created came from out of his imagination. The very first model of this mic, the very first model of that camera came from a place that didn't have a quote-unquote scientific method or source data. The source data was their imagination. The source reference was their imagination. And so once we understand that, we can see how over time, when this is utilized properly, our imaginations change the mode of reality if we understand how to use it. And I give you an example. This is the one that I like to give. Right now, anybody that's a basketball fan, you know that it's the NCAA tournament. The Final Four games were just held yesterday. Championship is Monday night. Well, in 2014, the UConn Huskies men's basketball team, they started off the season like 8-0, 9-0. And they traveled to the state of Texas where they played 2 road games. They lost both games. So they end up being like 9-2. The coach, Kevin Ali, takes these young men to the AT&T Stadium in Dallas, Texas. And he tells them, I'm taking you on a vision tour. I just want you to come into this stadium and I want you to visualize yourselves here playing for the national championship. I want you to see the confetti falling on you. I want to hear you see you envisioning your fans here cheering for you, being excited for you as you're cutting the nets down as champions. Well, UConn went on to have a lackluster season. They wiggled into the tournament at like a 7 seed. Anybody that knows it's 64 teams, so they had like 28 other teams that were ranked ahead of them. So basically the middle of the pack. Nobody expected them to even make it to the Final Four, let alone win the championship. Well, 3 months later in April, that same team that went to do that visualization technique or tour in that building found themselves in that exact same building playing for the national championship and won the national championship. Now you have to ask yourself a question. Is that a coincidence? And if it is, then how do we get into the science, as Noble always says, of creating these coincidences? Because in my book, I lay it out. I show the neuroscience behind this, okay? Where they show how the imagination actually alters the physiology in the brain. Where the same neurons actually fire in the brain, in the motor cortex, as if a person was actually physically doing something. The brain cannot tell the difference between an external act of the senses versus an imaginal act of the mind. This has been scientifically proven for those that need that confirmation. So to answer the question, if enough of us come together as a band of miniature light particles, and we come together with the same idea in mind, and appropriate the same image in mind for the condition that we see happening to people of color, because that's where the question is directed toward, where you see police brutality and these other things, then we can uplift the state of our people simply in our minds. And over time and repetition, these things in the external world will start to mimic the mode that we've created subjectively. And so, you know, it's a higher science. It's one that denotes a person having faith about what they're creating subjectively versus what they're seeing objectively in the reflection called their consciousness.
What would you say the term, what does enlightenment mean to Minister Jew?
Well, you know, a lot of schools of thought have different variations of what enlightenment is. You know, one pantheon says it's nothingness is enlightenment, being in a state of pure emptiness. Another cultural group will say, you know, divine union with the Creator. My definition of enlightenment is when the individual starts to realize that the internal processes and mechanics of their mind and their consciousness is creating the external environment and the external situations that they see on a regular basis, and they know without a shadow of a doubt that it's a projection of their mind. That's enlightenment to me, because it takes a special type of individual to reach that point. It's not easy. You know, we're under the influence of a lot of bodies in this solar system, and it takes an extreme amount of practice and discipline to fine-tune the mind to literally become the sun of your environment, where you're keeping everything in orbit, where everything is revolving around you based upon your dictates, okay? And so that's my definition of enlightenment. And the processes of what happens in the brain, you can see it clearly. I've done some research on this subject matter, had a webinar a couple months back. Your whole persona changes when you become quote-unquote enlightened. Different synaptic channels become activated in the brain, specifically in the limbic brain, that bring online a different personality and a warehouse full of wisdom to be endowed upon those whose ears are ready to hear. That's what enlightenment is to Minister Jew.
Okay. Talk about the cosmic forces. You mentioned astrology. Talk about the cosmic forces in relation to what you perceive to be or know to be as the correct application. You know, a lot of us here, or as we study the cosmic aspect, astrology, you will hear that transit, you know, I'm going through my Saturn return, I'm 28 years old, or I'm 60 years old, and I'm under the influence of a particular planet. And, you know, of course, since the planet is so big and I'm just a tiny human, it's taught in a manner as if the planet is dictating the person's actions. Talk about the spiritual application of the cosmos.
Well, over the years, the way that we've utilized the planets is, you know, when you become aware that this force that people call God or Nether or whatever makes you comfortable, saying out of your mouth, whatever makes you comfortable. Once you realize that that force is within you, and it's just not rhetoric when you say that, but you've actually had experiences that are happening subjectively, where you know without a shadow of a doubt that this thing called reality is just a mere Maya or illusion. Once you've understood that, then you start to look at planetary influences a little different. And let me make this clear. This is not often. We may be talking 99%, no, to be honest. You know, it might be a small 1% down here that understands this, that actually practices it and can showcase it. And so we use the planets as amplifying forces. You know, so in Minister Jew's mind, if I've got something that I'm working on a quantum level, I might use a planetary body that can coexist with my thought. So if I'm dealing with a cerebral type of imaginal act, I might invoke the aspects of Mercury at a particular time when this planet is transiting. Or I may, if I'm dealing with some type of, I want to expand my consciousness, or I'm looking to be some righteous type of judgment, I might use a Jupiter transit and invoke that holy name or that hidden name of that particular body. Or if I'm in a mood where I feel like it's wartime, right, I might invoke the energy of a Mars on the transit. But I'm going to be clear and be very honest. If I'm not utilizing those things in that manner, then I'm not looking at it. I've come to the point where I've seen happen on multiple occasions where I've thought a thing and 10 minutes later it showed up in my reality, which may have something to do, let's just say, with a planet that's traveling, Jupiter transits a sign, in and out every 12 months or so, or the moon making a cycle every 28 odd days or whatnot, or the sun making a 30-day transit through a particular zodiac sign. And so if I'm going to use my logic in some of the situations that I've seen occur from me having a thought, and I know that these bodies don't move that fast. They don't move 10 minutes or 2 minutes or even 2 seconds. Then at that point, I have to come to the conclusion that my thoughts and my mind is the superior complex down here. And that the more I decide to drive that manual vehicle, the more I'm in control of what happens to me. So that's the application that Minister Jew uses it in. And I've given example after example of this. There's been people that have been with me on some of these trips that have seen these things manifest. So it's just not my testimonial, they say in order for something to be true, you need 2 or more to testify to it. And I'm very comfortable with more than 2 to testify to what I'm saying, because they've seen it with their own eyes. But that's not to negate or to knock the craft of astrology, because I love it too. I was brought up in it the last 5 years, I came in as a student of Anpu's and excelled in it fast. And so it's still plausible, very much plausible. All I'm saying is that when you reach a different level of understanding, your perception around that particular craft starts to change,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk about the imagination and meditation. Is there a difference?
Well, I'm still a student of the game, man. I'm still learning it. So I still listen to Anpu. And I heard him on one of these conference calls that we had, and he was like, meditation is the yin, imagination is the yang, the meditation is the feminine, the imagination is the masculine. And I tend to agree with that, those sentiments that he put out, or that you put out. And I think, one, meditation amplifies, because we're talking spiritual phenomena. All the research has been done on meditation about creating more gray matter in the brain, making you feel more happy, a calmer state of mind, lowering the blood pressure, and all these things. So when I answer this question, I'm speaking as if you may already know those. So I'm not talking about those benefits of meditation. I'm talking about the psycho-spiritual dynamic of what it represents. You know, meditation allows you to amplify your intuition, your psychic ability, shall we say, your precognition. You start to get in a place or a void in meditation that synchronizes you with the universal flow of the cosmos. And so all of these things are existing simultaneously. The past, the future, and the present is one conglomerate. You see, and these things are permeating through space and time. These events are permeating through space and time in order to catch up with you here in the physical reality. So meditation allows you to, in essence, catch that glimpse of light or that object or that scene that hasn't quite made it into this physical dynamic. In essence, you're there when the snapshot is first taken. You're you possess the originals or the first copy before it's passed down from hand to hand to hand to hand. What meditation does is it allows you to see what these things are that are going to permeate into this existence. And so that's a beautiful skill to have, you know, because you can engage another individual and tell them, you know, this is what may occur. You know, this is some of the things that I've been seeing. And then sometimes it manifests just like that if the person doesn't take precautionary steps to change that wave and make another observation of that light before it actually collapses into a final particle in their reality. Now, visualization and imagination is different in the fact that what we're saying is that you're actually creating the snapshot. You're creating the snapshot. You're saying, this is what I choose to see. You know, how can somebody say, I want 10,000? That's what I want, Minister Jew. And I say, okay, you utilize these techniques. It will bud and it will flower. And then 5 months later, 10,000 shows up. The exact amount. You know? How can I tell a young lady, and I put her in my book, her home gets burglarized. They steal $150,000 worth of merchandise. She comes to me, she hears what I talk about, been knowing her since the 6th grade. And she comes to me and says, Jamil, how can I utilize what you talk about to get my stuff back? And I said, well, you're going to have to do something that you never did before. She says, what? I said, you're going to have to find God inside of yourself. I tell her, I need you to imagine that you have your things back. I said, well, what do you want back the most? 2 designer bags running in the range $10,000 to $12,000 in value. She said, they don't make them anymore, Jamil. I can't get those bags back. She's a very prestigious woman. Been owning her own business since she was like 20. You know, we 34 years old, so 14 years ago. She went off out of high school, said, bump that, I ain't going to work for nobody. I'm going to start my own business. And very lucrative and successful. And so she says, hey, I want my bags back. They don't make those Louis bags anymore. They don't make that Chanel bag no more, Jamil. I want them back because I really like the bags. So I said, all right, cool. I just need you to do this imaginal act every day as if you have the bags, even though you don't have the bags. And so she said, all right, I'll try it. You know, desperate, you try anything when you get desperate. And so about 3 weeks passed, and I got a phone call. It was on a Tuesday, I'll never forget. She just screaming with excitement, ecstatic. And I said, well, what happened, Tootie? She said, you won't believe it. I said, yes, I will. I will believe it. She says, a lady comes into my beauty shop, because she owns a beauty shop. Older woman, like in her 60s, comes in the beauty shop. And they start to have a conversation. Tootie tells her about her home being broken into. And they're having a dialogue. And the lady says, well, you know, what all did they take? And Tootie's telling her the bags that they took. And the lady says, well, wow, you know, my nephew this past weekend just brought me and my sister some bags in for Mother's Day. And so Tootie said, oh, that was nice. What kind of bags were they? And so she starts to explain and describe the way that the bags look. And so as they're talking about these bags, Tootie says, those sound like my bags. So the lady pulls up a picture of the bags on her phone and calls her nephew and says, well, where did you get these bags from? And he said, well, some guy came into the barbershop boosting both of these bags, and I bought both of the bags from the gentleman, and I just gave them to you and my mama for Mother's Day. Long story short, the next day on a Wednesday, Tootie had both of her bags back. The booster came in there with the bags that were stolen from Tootie's home, sold them to this lady who just happens to be a client of Tootie's, who comes in, Tootie say maybe twice a year. They strike up a conversation, and 3 weeks later, after doing these exercises, the 2 bags that she told me that she wanted back from the technique that I gave her are now safely back in her closet. Coincidence?
Is this very similar to how Jim Carrey, when he was on Oprah, had showed Oprah, you know, that he used to have a check for like in his wallet for $10 million, and he would go up to the you know, the hills of Beverly Hills and imagine that he would live in this house, and he had this check set out for like a couple years out in the future for acting services rendered.
That's right.
Is this similar to that technique?
It's very similar to it. It's been multiple cases, and at the workshop, I'm going to lay them all out. You know, I've been following this phenomenon. This is what I study. This is what I do. So it's become a part of my existence. I am the imagination. I am the quantum. And so it's absolutely like that with some more sugar and spice added to it. Mm-hmm. You know, I show people how to think from it and not of it. You know what I mean? I give people other techniques that I call appetizers to help remove some of the blockages in the subconscious mind. That's the fertile ground where these things have to take root. So absolutely, I think that was '97 when Carrey came on the show. This was before Oprah was on her Deepak Chopra thing. Mm-hmm. She wasn't even on her spiritual game yet, you know. And they talk about that a lot, you know, which is another reason why I created this, is because I really want people to reach the highest spiritual plateau that they can. But I know that that's almost an impossibility until people have acquired the things that their hearts desire on a physical level, what this gross matter has to offer. Albeit it the lowest manifestations of light, it still has some very beautiful things to offer. And so I show people how to do this, and hopefully when they realize that they've had enough of the material world, then they can look inward and ascend to the higher constitutions of themselves. But absolutely, it's pretty much in the same vein as what Jim Carrey explained to Oprah Winfrey.
Right, because I know he had a check for $10 million in his pocket, and on that same week, in the future, when that day got there, he got his first check for $10 million, which I guess was equivalent to Nikki, who had on her vision, I need 10,000, you know, and 10,000 popped up. 2 more things, real fast, we wrap this up. Talk about the quantum duality. I hear you talk about how, you know, a wave and a particle, this Moses and Aaron, the 2 witnesses in Revelations, Elijah and Elisha, John the Baptist and Jesus, Cain and Abel. It's always like this reference to, I call it a singular duality, because the dual purposes or the dual function appears to be 2 different things, but it's really representing one thing. Talk about that duality. What's the purpose of it?
Well, it's for us to always be able to see the external and the internal. Sometimes, in most cases, it's harder to see the internal just because how strong the senses are. And so we always see this balance occurring, where if you're not a student of the internal sciences, the external sciences can give you enough indicating factors to lead you back within. So it's like the prime example. I just have a quantum assessment the other day with a young man, and he asked me about altars. And he had a situation where he was in a place where some people around him were uncomfortable with his altar that he had set up. And so he felt like he was, it demoralized him, where he thought he wasn't going to be able to get into his state of mind he needed to get into. And I told him, I said, well, the real altar is in your mind. That's what a real altar is. That's what sets the stage for the operation. And I told him, I said, the altar is only a reflection of something that you have going on internally. Some ideals that you have tumbling in your consciousness. And so he wasn't quite ready to accept his own consciousness being the altar, but the external altar was still providing the mechanism for him to have an experience. So the external gives you a reference point to one day be able to look inside and say, wait a minute, man, the same thing is going on inside of me. When I look at the functions of how these things work, just looking at the hippocampus, 12 different layers, 4 different tissues. And then you look at the zodiac and you see these 12 constellations and these 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water. And you start to see how what's inside of me is outside of me and vice versa. So whenever you see these dualities, Moses and Aaron, left brain, right brain, all of these things that are coming in pairs is so that you can balance the two out. You can see the operation of one by looking at the operation of the other. So it's a beautiful tool to have. If nobody's taught you to go inside, the external world eventually will lead you inwardly. And so that's really what those motifs are about when you see the duality taking place in these stories.
Okay. All right, and our final one will be Quantum Scriptures, a New World Interpretation. This Bible. Talk about it, man. Talk about what was coming up on April the 17th on these Sunday classes.
Hey, look, man, it's a lot of controversy surrounding that book, and I understand it, right? But it's not what they think it is. It's personifications, man. Stories, allegories being told to express different states of consciousness that we can fall in and out of at will based upon what we're observing. And so in those stories, it's a lot of jewels inside of them. Not necessarily in the English translation, although it's some there too. But you have to really take it back to the organic language it was written in, and then be able to see it from the author's standpoint, in the context in which they meant it to be interpreted from their vantage point. And so that's what the Quantum Scriptures is going to be about. I'm going to show people how it's nothing but quantum all through the book. All through the book. In the book of Daniel, when he's taken up and he's taken to the riverbanks to see what the King Cyrus is going to be doing, moving backwards and forwards in time. Well, it would sound crazy until the advent of quantum physics. We say, what you mean, somebody traveling back in time 200 years? That's some Star Trek spooky stuff. Or, you know, being able to travel into the future, man, you crazy. They think you can't do that. What you talking about? We right here, right now. Well, last 100 years, quantum physics suggests that's not true. It's not true to the particle reality, but it is very true to the wave reality, to these subatomic particles that don't abide by the same laws as the physical world does. And so what I have been gifted to do is to show what part of the consciousness is in correspondence with these quantum particles. Hence the imagination guru. So when we get in this book, I'm just going to show the people, man, that this really a book full of techniques. And the proof is in the pudding. It could be a lot of rhetoric surrounding the situation, a lot of horizontal teachings about dates and who wrote this and when, etc. That's not really Minister Jew's concern. I'm talking about what I see here, what I translate here, what it represents, where has this been put in practice before, what are the results from these things, and then is it applicable to my life? And I'm going to say it this way. We're at $1.3 million manifested. 900,000 in a short 9 months. Over 95 testimonials in 9 months. From people whose lives have changed from utilizing the data that we teach. So at some point we're going to have to really evaluate what it is that we're listening to and see, is it changing my life, or am I just holding on to information to say that I know it? And so that's what the quantum scriptures is going to be about. We got the testimonials, we got the proofs, and I got the neuroscience to support it. Some of the functions that they're talking about in some of these scriptures. And so it's going to be phenomenal, man. It's going to be nothing short of amazing, you know?
Let's see if we can squeeze a story out of you real fast. Can you share, if you can recall it, if it's not too juicy, the Sparks of Light story going up the back?
Oh, man, you talking about... You talking about from the biblical reference?
Yeah, the biblical standpoint. Yeah.
You know, every time I say this name, I have to be very careful because it's actually an internal light code that, you know, when you say somebody's name, you get their attention. You know what I mean? You call somebody out in the crowd, they turn around and look. And so, in this particular verse in the book of Daniel, it's a verse that talks about this archangel or angel with the personage of Michael. And it talks about how it'd be a time where it'd be travesty and uproar and things. And when Michael appears, this is the force that will resurrect you or lift you up from that particular situation. And so people read that and they may think of this external story and something coming out of the sky and lifting you up onto a mountain. No. When you translate some of the words in that particular passage, some of the words equate to sparks of light and the backside of a human being. And when you study a lot of these traditions, the Hindu and even some of the Egyptian cultures, you'll see that this term Kundalini or Uraeus is used in these traditions to talk about the process of man and woman awakening internally to their God potential, to have insight beyond insight, to have the cosmic library downloaded into this physical body. And so these sparks of light that travel up the back in that particular passage is giving a reference to these other cultures that talk about the Kundalini and the Arayas, which is this light energy on a psycho-spiritual level that rises up the template of the body and the back, that eventually reaches the Holy of Holies, which is the limbic brain, and starts to excite the centers in the limbic brain. And I've got much neuroscience on this too, showing what happens when the anterior commissure and the synapses start to atrophy from the electrical currents moving from the right hemisphere to the left, etc. So that's what that actual story is talking about. It's talking about the resurrection of your lower self that came down into degeneration, returning into regeneration or ascension, back up the ladder called your spine.
Absolutely. So that's Quantum Scriptures. I think you have April the 17th, a Sunday. It'll be 2 Sundays out of each month that you'll be doing online Sunday school on the aspect. So that's right there on theimaginationguru.com. Just click on memberships and you'll see it right there. And the Dapper workshop is when?
April 9th, this coming Saturday. So if you in the region, if you can hop a plane and you got it like that, come on down, man. Holiday Inn, Chicago O'Hare, located on Cumberland. So if you're flying in, it's a shuttle that'll take you right from the airport to the hotel and vice versa back to the airport when your flight leaves. It's a one-day workshop. We're going to get it in. We're going to do some techniques. We're going to all participate. It's going to be fun. It's going to be great, man. You know how the priesthood do, man. We rock out. We have a good time.
Indeed. And that following Sunday, the very next day,
we're going to be at IIT on the college campus, Illinois Institute of Technology, 10 West 31st Street over in the Stewart building. We're going to be over there, and we're going to be getting into this light phenomenon too, and showing people how utilizing their consciousness is the precursor to having success when they're dealing with legal issues, shall we say, in a broad sense, or issues with the quote-unquote state. We're going to be showing people how to utilize this particular science that we're talking about here now in reference to those situations, because a lot of people are suffering in that arena, dealing with some of this information. They find themselves in some very tight spots, and so we want to show people how to utilize their consciousness to change those circumstances.
Yep, that's what it is, man, and we signing out to the next time.
Peace.